Rawls, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of One's Interests. So far, we have seen theories of justice that attempt to answer how we distribute those things that we value by focusing on a particular aspect, whether it be the general welfare, the moral law, or self-ownership, and build a system to encompass all the rest. What Sandel wants to show is that every time one starts at a single point, other intuitions about what is good just get pushed aside. However, what would happen if we simply started by trying to balance these into a coherent whole? This is Rawls' project. Let us start by looking back to Kant and the categorical imperative. This in itself addresses individuals rather than social justice. Rawls does something interesting with Kant's idea. One thing that comes up when reading Rawls is that you find that he is able to synthesize many diverse ideas into a single coherent vision. For instance, while in his book, A Theory of Justice, he criticizes utilitarianism, consequences still matter. Although he dismisses libertarianism out of hand, his notion of liberty is very similar to it, but is grounded in a very Kantian manner. Locke proposed that societies were based on an ideal contract between the governing and the governed. By ideal, I mean that no one could point to an actual document or event that details this contract. What Rawls does is to formally contrast actual contracts and hypothetical ones. This is analogous to what Kant does between the sensible world and the intelligible world. Where Rawls differs from Kant is that rather than seeing freedom as choosing what one wants, he sees freedom as the ability to pursue one's interest. Interest would include one's future pursuits as well as protecting one's current holdings. This shifts Rawls back to something closer to how a utilitarian, such as Mill, or a libertarian would view freedom. The differences being that freedom for Rawls is solidly grounded in his approach and is not based on ownership and does not entail the minimalist state as found in libertarianism. Rawls starts by characterizing justice as fairness. Specifically, to treat people fairly is to treat them equally. However, there are lots of meanings behind the word equally. For example, one can say that laws apply to everyone equally, but that is not to say that all laws are fair. Decades ago, poll taxes were not uncommon. For those who might not know what a poll tax is, there was a time when voters had to pay a special tax, presumably for the upkeep of polling stations, in order to vote. On one level, everyone was treated equally because everyone had to pay the same amount of tax. On the other, it was not at all equal because it meant that certain voters, namely the poor and very often African Americans, simply could not pay that tax and so were disenfranchised. For Rawls, there's a more basic meaning to equality, namely that each of us has an equal right to be treated well. The idea of equality, then, is more commonly called now equity. Rawls presents two principles that govern a just society. The first runs as follows. Each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberties compatible with those of others. This is very much like we've already seen in Mill. Unlike Mill, Rawls takes fairness, not pleasure, to be the measure of what makes for a just society. So Rawls' first principle is actually grounded in something that we can judge from within the system itself. This principle also sounds very much like something that you might find a libertarian agreeing to. However, for a libertarian, ownership governs liberty. In Rawls, equity governs the limits of liberty. Notice that while we no longer are talking about individuals as ends in themselves, no one can use someone else simply as a means to an end because we are each free to pursue our own interest. So let us proceed with the second principle. Social and economic inequalities are to be arranged such that they are both reasonably expected to be of everyone's advantage and attached to positions and offices that are open to all. Having a fair shot is not the same as equality of outcomes. This is not the world of Vonnegut's Harry Bergman short story. Rawls is not advocating for a society where everyone has the same abilities, income, social standing, only that A, any society is so arranged as to be of everyone's benefit, and B, everyone has an equal opportunity to occupy positions and offices of power and an equal voice to address themselves to those positions or offices. Rawls' veil of ignorance asks what sort of society we would want to live in if we did not know in advance what sort of abilities we would have, what our societal standing would be, what sort of families we grew up in, what religious or minority groups we belong to, or what sort of disabilities we might have. If we don't know where we'd end up, the rational and just thing to do is to structure society so that everyone does well. Rawls argues that one would not choose to structure a society along egalitarian lines because the general welfare allows for the possibility that an overall good would leave some at a disadvantage. From behind the veil of ignorance, one would not rationally choose along libertarian lines because the concept of self-ownership entails that one's abilities and inheritances can be used as one pleases, even if, as a consequence, those less fortunate are disadvantaged. One would choose a society where we all have a fair shot to pursue our own interest and a society that works for the advantage of everyone. Moreover, the libertarian view of a contract is too weak, according to Rawls. Earlier, I mentioned that Rawls made a distinction between hypothetical and actual contracts. According to Rawls, for an actual contract to have moral force, it must have two things for both parties. One, autonomy, and B, reciprocity. Autonomy requires that contracts are freely entered into, are not coerced, and that all parties enter into the contracts with full knowledge. If you'll remember Sandel's example of the leaky toilet. In principle, this isn't very different from a libertarian perspective, but Rawls goes on with a couple of restrictions that a libertarian might balk at. Reciprocity requires that contracts in principle benefit all parties, that is, in principle it must be a win-win contract, and include obligations to somehow repay for goods and services rendered. Remember Sandel's auto repair example. Behind the veil of ignorance, the idea of the contract is taken a step further. It assumes that we are all equally rational and all equally desirous of being able to pursue our own interest, even though through behind the veil we don't know what those interests might be, and all wish for our civil and religious liberties to be protected, even though we might not know what those are. Unlike actual contracts, the aim of the hypothetical contract is to structure society to meet our best ends. Rawls calls this an egalitarian structure. Check in with Sandel to see what Rawls has to say about the fairness of the following societal structures and see why they fall short of being just: caste or oligarchical systems, libertarianism, meritocracy, and absolute equality. Sandel mentions two objections to Rawls' egalitarian vision. First, that egalitarianism destroys incentive. Rawls' reply is that the difference principle still allows for incentives. Incentives are allowed for a few to broaden opportunities so that the many, including the disadvantaged, are in some way advantaged. The cap on incentives only comes into play so as to allow opportunities for all. The second objection is that it doesn't seem fair that unequal effort appears to be equally rewarded. Here, the reply is that we already award effort unequally. The compensation that a Fortune 500 CEO makes in terms of effort alone is not proportionally commensurate with the effort put in by the lowest paid employees of one of those companies. Until very recently, colleges and universities could consider race as a factor when admitting students. Before 1978, actual quotas aimed at redressing the effects of generations of discrimination were legal. Affirmative action and diversity programs have come under fire, not only in academia, but in the world of commerce as well. The question is whether the goals of equity, diversity, and inclusion are fair to those who are more qualified and so more deserving, but are excluded from consideration because of these policies. According to Rawls, there is no such thing as moral desert. One does not deserve to be in any given position or given any particular honor. Those are governed by the mission of the various institutions. Consequently, by Rawls standards, if a mission of a given institution includes increased diversity or redressing social injustices, then they are free to do so, provided that everyone, including the most disadvantaged, are benefit. Recall that Rawls maintained that we should not take credit for our natural or inherited abilities, and so questions the notion of a meritocracy. Just because your SAT scores are well-nigh perfect, your extracurricular activities are prodigious, your volunteer work laudable, you might not fit into a mission of a given diversity, whether it's a business, institution of higher education, or some voluntary institution. For instance, some Christian colleges require that their employees sign and adhere to a statement of faith and conduct. It expresses the mission and character of the institution, and your academic credentials are insufficient. There are secular equivalents in the business world. The upshot is that your abilities are just a matter of moral luck and are valuable only insofar as they contribute to the mission of the larger institution. Sandell's response to this is that moral desert is not about who is worthy, but what is worthwhile. It is not simply that certain people deserve particular honors, compensation, or recognition or positions, but that the qualities that those individuals embody deserve recognition. Moreover, an institution's or community's mission is not arbitrary. Some missions are more worthwhile than others. It is not simply a matter of one fitting into a given mission or character of a larger community, but also whether that mission or community is truly valuable. Next time, we will look at justice from the perspective of distributing goods based not on the individual or community, but on the value of the goods themselves. We will look at Aristotle and virtue theory.